Hello, everybody, and welcome to the European Marine Board third Thursday Science webinar. It is 1 o'clock on my watch, and I'm very happy to be your moderator today. So my name is Sheila Heymans. I'm the Executive Director of the European Marine Board. And today our webinar is basically on our new document addressing underwater noise in Europe. So before we start, just some housekeeping rules. Just be sure that you put your name clearly enter your name in when you start, and if you can also put in where you're from, so that we can actually know who you are when you're asking questions. If you do want to ask questions, please use the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen, to put your questions in. And when the speakers are finished, then I will read out the questions to the speakers. If you have any technical problems, please use the chat function for technical support. Be aware that the webinar is being recorded, and it is actually being live streamed right now on YouTube, and we will make it available on our website after the fact. So that's the intro bits. So as I said today, our science webinar is on, I'm trying to make sure that you guys can actually see, is actually on our Future Science Brief number 7, addressing underwater noise in Europe, the current state of knowledge and future priorities. If you're interested in the document, you can download it on the link, or you can just go to the European Marine Board website and see it there under publications. We will have 2 speakers today. The first one is Dr. Frank Thomsen, who is the Senior Scientist and Director of Market Development for Sound and Marine Life at DHI in Denmark. And he was the chair of the working group that produced this document, the European Marine Board Underwater Noise Working Group. And our second speaker is Dr. Sonia Mendes. She was the co-chair of the working group, and she is scientific advisor at JNCC in the UK. So without further ado, I will stop my screen sharing, and Sonia will start sharing her screen, and they will give a combined presentation. So Frank, Sonia, if you want to start your video and start sharing, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Thanks for the introduction, very kind. Thank you. Now is this in presentation mode, or?
Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to get my, I don't know what happened here, that my Zoom view has. I can't see the share screen.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to stop sharing, share the screen, and start yes, sharing again.
It. Oh, I can see. I can see. That's the problem. Okay. Okay. So.
It's right. Typical.
Let me know if you can now see the slide.
Yeah.
Ah, wonderful.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Yeah, my name is Frank Thomsen. I'm the chair, I should say I was the chair of that European Marine Board Expert Working Group on Underwater Noise. And I will give the presentation today with my co-chair, Sonia Mendes from JNCC. Next slide. A little bit of background before we go into the details of the report. Underwater noise impacts have become an important issue worldwide. When I finished my university degree about 20 years ago, the topic of noise impacts and acoustics was basically something done in academia, but not really much beyond. But this has changed with major policy bodies addressing the issues such as OSPAR, the European Commission, and just recently the United Nations. They convened a special session on underwater sound and noise impacts in 2018. Now, the issue is an important issue because water is an ideal medium for sound transportation. Sound underwater travels more than 4 times faster than in air, and there's much less attenuation. So sound can range very far underwater. And consequently, marine life is really depending on sound, and sound impact ranges can be very large. With marine life, we can see in this picture, we see marine mammals, but we also see fish and invertebrates. So for all of these marine life forms, sound is actually quite an important issue. Next. Now in 2008, the Marine Board published a report, a position paper on the effects of anthropogenic sound on marine mammals, a draft research strategy. And it was really what it says. It was a strategy for future research items on the topic. And it was actually following a risk-based approach, which was quite new at that time, at least for application on the noise impact area. And it was very influential insofar it was used to outline the priorities, but not only that, it was also used in environmental impact assessments later on by a variety of researchers. So this position paper was quite important. Now, 12 years have passed, and in 2020, next slide, Sonia, please. In 2020, the EMB convened a new group with some high-level objectives and then specific objectives. I will only mention the high-level objectives here. We were asked to update on progress related to the topic of underwater noise impacts since the 2008 EMB publication. So it was really about providing an update on the progress, and there was so much going on in the 12 years that the time was about right to do that. Then raise awareness of the current knowledge and research gaps. Basically, important was to broaden the scope from marine mammals because the position paper was focusing on marine mammals. And of course, not only marine mammals, but also fish and marine invertebrates produce and use sound. So our task was not broaden the scope to all marine organisms, but to also to invertebrates and fish besides marine mammals. And then the last objective was to highlight the conflicts and solutions that exist relative to underwater sound. Now, really important is from the specific objectives is the last one. Considering all of the above, we were asked to highlight key actions related to research, monitoring, policy, and management needs. And that was really the task here. The task was to come up with a list of priority actions for future research. And this is also why we call this not a report, but what you have in your hand or online is actually a future science brief. So it's to brief the regulators on future science that needs to be researched. And we kept it simple. It's not a page by page or paper by paper review. It's a summarized review of the state of knowledge on the issue of underwater noise, and when it comes to impacts, but also when it comes to regulation and management. And then based on that, a priority list of future research topics. Next slide. What I have to point out is that this future science brief answers directly to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science and Sustainable Development Goals. It's very relevant to outcome 1, a clean ocean where sources of pollution are identified and reduced or removed. And it's very important and relevant to outcome 2, a healthy and resilient ocean where marine ecosystems are understood, protected, restored, and managed. It also is relevant to challenges brought up by the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, but I will not go into detail here. Next slide. This is a picture of the group, and I call it the Dream Team, and I explain what I mean with Dream Team in a second. I think this picture has been taken from our kickoff meeting back in 2020. The group was comprised of experts in really complementary skills. We had acousticians, biologists, we had regulators, experts in marine mammals, experts in fish, acoustics, and it was a very nicely composed group, also with a parity between men and women, which made it extremely convenient to work with. And people came from all kinds of organizations across Europe. And a dream team it was because I think we formed a really good working team, beside the fact that we had to do all that work remotely during the Corona crisis. And this is, I think this is a great achievement. We tried to make some kind of horizon for us that we could meet in person. For example, Portugal was one of the goals of our final meeting, but we really never really made it. So thanks to that really dream team that delivered this future science brief. Next. And this is it. This is the front page of the future science brief. The title is Addressing Underwater Noise in Europe, Current State of Knowledge and Future Research Priorities, or Future Priorities. And it came out about, I think, in October 2021. So it's really hot from the press. Next. Just to mention the general structure of the report has 6 chapters. We have an introduction into the topic, and then chapter 2 here, which is dealing with the anthropogenic noise sources. There's this graph, these very informative infographs in the report. And you can see here, for example, this is taken from that chapter, the anthropogenic sound sources and natural sound sources. For example, in the middle, there are 2 dolphins whistling or clicking away in the picture. And then you've got an anthropogenic sound source, a variety of anthropogenic sound sources. For example, this offshore wind farm here in the upper right area. So it's a nice illustration of the overview that is presented in chapter 2. Chapter 2, as I said, deals with the noise sources and then the spatial dimension. Where are they located and where is most pressure? And then also with trends in ocean noise. Next slide. A key chapter is, of course, the review of impacts, of effects, and then they can lead to impacts. We divided the chapter basically into these 4 impact or effect areas based on Richardson et al. In 1995, and then modified by Tony Hawkins and Art Popper just a few years back. You can divide noise impacts in 4 different topics relative to the distance from the sound source location. The reality is a little bit more difficult than this broad scheme, but it's workable as a first division of impacts. So there's masking, that this is basically the masking of important signals, for example, communication calls by background noise. There's behavior response. Behavior response can be in all kinds of forms, from very subtle behavior reactions to outright avoidance of areas. And it's depending on many different factors, and ranges can be quite large as masking ranges or near the dimension of masking ranges. Closer to the sound source and at higher received doses, there's the chance or the chance of impaired hearing or impaired hearing. That's a temporary elevation of the hearing threshold, either as I said, temporary or permanent. We call that TTS or PTS. Both doesn't mean that the hearing is lost. It's just an elevation of the hearing threshold in certain frequencies, either, as I said, permanent or temporary. And then at even higher received doses, usually closer to the sound source, there's the chance of physical and physiological effects, stress effects, for example, which is both of these effects are relatively new. So chapter 3 goes in some overview over these 4 impacts based on recent research past 2008, and focusing on fish, invertebrates, and marine mammals. And next slide. And with this general overview, I think I leave it to Sonia now to go into detail with some aspects of the management and regulation. On to you, Sonia.
Okay. Thanks, Frank, and thanks to the EMB and to Sheila. And hi, everyone. I will now focus just on chapter 4 of the EMB Future Science Brief. And this chapter is dedicated to the management of underwater noise and the progress made in the last decade on regulations and other drivers that have led to a better understanding and management of underwater noise, environmental impact assessments, mitigation measures, emerging technologies and methods. At the end of my talk, I will also highlight some of the recommended priority actions on underwater noise, as Frank mentioned, as judged by the dream team of the EMB working group, and which are listed in chapter 6 of the brief. So, onto the regulations and drivers. So this useful timeline is one of the infographics in the EMB brief, depicting the history of development, such as key publications that have had a bearing on underwater noise research and management in European waters. As one can see, there is quite a difference before and after 2008, when the first EMB report on the issue was published at Boyd et al. Coincidental or not, EMB should definitely take some credit in having helped increase awareness of the issue in Europe. Concurrent with the EMB report was the adoption by EU member states of what is probably the biggest driver of action on underwater noise in Europe, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, or MSFD. This was the first time that underwater noise appeared explicitly in European legislation. That year also saw resolutions on noise, specific on underwater noise, from two major international conservation agreements, the CMS and the CVD. I'd like also to note here, in 2007, there was a paper by Southall and colleagues, which for the first time set out noise exposure criteria for all marine mammal species. Whilst this was a US-led project, it has had significant influence in the European context too. But things really took off after 2008. So in 2010, a European task group on underwater noise was formed to advise the European Commission on the implementation of the MSFD, leading to the establishment of regional noise monitoring programs in Europe. Then in 2014, here we go, the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, adopted guidelines for reducing underwater noise from commercial shipping to address adverse impacts on marine life. Now, this was a real landmark publication. That same year, Popper and colleagues published similar noise exposure criteria. Here we go, this one, to the Southall 2007, but this time for fish, which, although subject to less protection by law, can be affected by noise all the same. So again, a hugely influential paper in the field of fish acoustics and impact assessments. A couple more publications worth highlighting here are the 2017 ISO standard for underwater acoustic terms, which has helped scientists communicate and collaborate better. And finally, in 2018, the UN Secretary General published a report on underwater noise, securing this issue as one of international concern at the highest level. So more detail on all of these can be found in our EMB brief. So one of the tools in our noise management toolbox is the environmental impact assessment, or EIA, undertaken when planning activities, and in this case, in planning noise activities at sea, such as seismic surveys and offshore construction. The EMB paper in 2008, with its risk assessment framework shown in this slide, was hugely influential in directing, as Frank mentioned before, not only research questions, but also EIAs for noise, the impact assessment process. In our brief, we recommended following this risk-based approach, which has been followed in the past decade quite often. You start by identifying and characterizing the noise source and its potential effect. You go on to undertake an exposure assessment where you assess the potential overlap of the sound field with a species of interest. And then you model the risk of hearing damage or behavioral disturbance through a dose response assessment. Then, if the assessment concludes that there is a risk of impact, mitigation measures need to be agreed and implemented, and any residual risk identified. So now, trawling through environmental impact assessments forms a large part of my work as advisor to regulators of offshore industries. If any of you have worked on noise EIAs, you may recognize this desk with large documents, often trading off quality by providing a lot of information, some of it unnecessary. As highlighted in our EMB brief, however, noise EIAs have much improved over the years, and more of an effort is being made to ensure these are proportionate to the risk and to the uncertainty. And my desk is tidier as well. So guidance plays a big role in ensuring more focused assessments. And there has been some helpful publications in the last decade, which are highlighted in the EMB brief. It is worth also giving a nod of recognition to industry and environmental consultants who have contributed massively to the development of impact assessment tools. So now on to the monitoring of noise. As highlighted in our EMB brief, systematic, wide-scale noise monitoring in Europe really took off after the adoption of the MSFD. And it's two indicators of good environmental status for both continuous noise and impulsive noise. So continuous noise monitoring has been carried out in the Baltic, North Sea, Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Black Seas. These programs have deployed sound monitoring stations to document the baseline sound levels and the trends over time. Shown here on top is an outcome of one of those programs, JOMOPANS, illustrating the estimated sound from shipping and wind in the North Sea. In this case, the lighter colors represent the highest levels of noise. So regarding impulsive noise monitoring, this has been addressed with the establishment of registries. And the bottom figure shows us the regional impulsive noise registry for the Northeast Atlantic, which is hosted by ICES. This database has been collating data since 2015, I believe, and recording where and when an activity took place. So we can now look for patterns and trends of the impulsive noise and overlaps with sensitive areas. Our EMB brief also has a section on mitigation for underwater noise and the progress made in this area. So there's a diversity of measures that can be taken, including the kind of standard and long-standing use of marine mammal observers to monitor an exclusion area for the presence of animals. But this has limitations, as many of you will know, since animals can be difficult to spot, for example, in high sea states. In fact, no measure is 100% effective, and often one must employ a variety of measures. For example, temporal and spatial restrictions can also be used and are particularly appropriate for various times that may be more sensitive to noise, such as fish spawning grounds. Our EMB brief also dedicates a section on the mitigation of shipping noise. So whilst adapting existing vessels to make them quieter can be done, this is costly. But now with a big push to design new ships that are more energy efficient and less polluting, there's also an opportunity to design quieter ships. Other measures include rerouting shipping lanes away from sensitive areas or speed restrictions. And finally, I'd like to highlight the recent pioneering work of the Port of Vancouver, which has come up with a noise management plan, which amongst other measures, has some economic incentives. So the quieter your ship, the larger the discount you get on berth fees. So obviously this is in Canada, but Europe and its ports should keep an eye on how this initiative develops. So a key approach that we highlight in the brief as well is underwater noise abatement. So systems have been developed in Europe in the last decade for reducing the loud noise emitted when hammering the foundations of offshore wind turbines. Examples are bubble curtains, you can see up here, and different material casings around the piles, you can see down here. These have been proven to be very effective at reducing sound levels. Now, further development and optimization are still underway and are still needed. For example, these techniques work better for reducing sound levels at the higher end of the spectrum, higher frequencies, so might be more suitable for marine mammals than other species like fish, for example. In addition, these systems can be challenging to deploy and can be costly. Therefore, more work around cost effectiveness is needed. So, we also dedicate a small section in the EMB brief to emerging technologies and methods that are helping to increase our understanding of marine species and the effects of noise on them. For example, the improvement in wildlife tags is sparking a revolution in research. You know, they've been around for a long time, but now they can not only be used to track animals, but also record received sound from, for example, anthropogenic activity source. And then you can relate this to the animals dive there, with which the tag also records. And even some physiological parameters such as oxygen uptake and believe it or not, even the size of a marine mammal's fish supper. So another area of major development has been the design of passive acoustic monitoring systems, or PAM, that can be deployed in the water column or on the seabed to monitor soundscapes, recording both natural and man-made sounds. For example, in Europe, PAM has recorded the displacement of harbor porpoises away from areas where wind farms are being installed. Here, a picture of a drone. There is also big potential for using remotely operated aerial vehicles. For example, drones can be used to film animal behavior at sea, at the sea surface, but also to collect samples. So in Iceland, there's these drones aptly named snotbots, and they're being used to catch the snot discharged from the whale blowholes, which is then analyzed for stress hormones to see if an increasing number of tourist whale watching boats are increasing their stress levels. Another area of development has been the improvements in the noise risk assessments and the tools around these. They've been really helped by better noise propagation models and the incorporation, more recently, the incorporation of animal movement models, which is what this figure here shows. And this helps much better estimates of exposure to sound to those animals. There are now also models that can simulate effects of noise on entire populations. But more generally, I mean, this is general for other, for all science, statistical and modeling methods have also much developed, and they can now help us make much better sense of the data collected. Okay, so we are reaching the end of our talk, and the next couple of slides show some of the recommended actions listed in chapter 6 of the brief that the EMB working group felt were important in moving us forward in this field in the next decade in Europe and beyond. While this is all in European context, there are a lot of other recommendations are applicable elsewhere. So we use the Boyd et al. 2008 risk assessment framework to guide and inform this choice. It might feel that we've listed just about everything that could be done, but we think that its recommendation is quite specific, and hopefully it will direct policy and research on the issue. I skipped some actions here that are more relevant to the first chapters that Frank mentioned, and I'm focusing mainly on actions related to chapter 4, the chapter I presented today. So we start with international standards. So there should be standards for each and every stage of the risk assessment framework. Whilst much progress has occurred in this area, there are still gaps, mainly those relating to marine bioacoustics. Second, we recommend better and more monitoring of species habitat use and behavior. I mean, without good baselines, it is very, very challenging to detect and then manage noise effects. Monitoring of soundscapes is also key, and we strongly encourage the continuation of existing and new collaborative European monitoring programs. Another area needing progress is that there are still several activities needing better sound source characterization, and this should be identified and studied. Next is an action on improving our understanding on the effectiveness, safety, and cost effectiveness of noise abatement and other mitigation measures. Then we have an action to develop regional action plans. I mean, regional approaches make particular sense given the transboundary nature of anthropogenic sound. And finally, a final recommendation was that international collaborative projects are essential in transferring knowledge to parts of the world where underwater noise monitoring and management is lagging. So sharing of data and best practices globally and openly will very much help with that. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and I will now pass on to Frank for the acknowledgements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Sonia and I would really like to thank the group again for their input and their hard work. We would like to thank the reviewers. We had an excellent crew of external reviewers from specific disciplines that actually went through the report in great detail, and we amended the report greatly. So thanks to the reviewers. We received advice and support from people outside the group. And of course, EMB support by Sheila, but most notably also by Paula. Paula really made it happen. So a big thanks for Paula Kellett for her never-ending support for this work. The editorial team was also really helpful in finishing the report. There are really nice infographics in there. And then we got help from specific people from the UNAS and Saturn project on chapter 2 and 4. So thanks all of them. It was really a team effort. And now I think we open the floor for questions, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia and Frank. That was a great overview of the position paper. Okay, so we have some questions. And I'm going to start with the first one from Patrick Lynn, who asked about the impact of underwater noise on seagrasses and specifically on Posidonia. And he says it's not covered in the document. Did you guys want to answer to that?
Yes, I can answer to that. We have covered that. We have debated that a little bit because it's a very recent study, but it's in the impact chapter. So we have included that. Okay,
so it is included. He just needs to have a read of it.
Yeah.
And then he also has a question on what is your position on stopping geophysical surveys where PTS is identified as an injury and the zone of PTS is identified. So he says, given that the Habitats Directive Article 12 prohibits deliberate disturbance of protected species, of which all European marine mammals and turtles are included. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can try and answer. Yeah, thanks for the questions. Yeah, the oil and gas industry has had for a decade, for more than a decade, for 20 years, guidelines on mitigation guidelines that they need to follow best practice to apply those guidelines to protect marine species from injury, in particular because it's measures that are usually the deployment of marine mammal observers, but also other measures. So this will be in line and in compliance with Habitats Directive that has been transposed into regulation for all European member states. I'm not saying it's perfect, and of course there are continued developments, and JNCC, of course we have published guidelines, and we constantly look to see if they're being implemented well, and if there's compliance, if there's things that need improving. I mean, hopefully we'll see less and less geophysical surveys. Apologies if there's anyone from oil and gas. I think everyone now agrees that's where things need to go. But that doesn't mean that mitigation needs to be continued improving.
Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. Frank, did you want to respond to that as well, or do you think?
No, Sonia is the expert on that, really.
Okay, so we'll.
Great answer. Yeah.
Okay, then Patrick has one more question. Do you consider naval sonar as an impulsive or non-impulsive noise?
Impulsive. There is a debate about that, of course, due to the signal complexity. But in the report, I just checked actually because I was reading the question, and I checked and looked at the report, and it's put in as an impulsive sound source.
Okay. Okay, and then Weneza Delowska, sorry if I mispronounce your name, asks, could you please repeat how the level of stress was measured?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but it's what we do is or what the investigators do, they look for indicators of stress. So one indicator of stress can be an increased heart rate. There was a very fascinating study that was actually prior to 2008, done on beluga whales in captivity, where they measured the heart rate before and after acoustic exposure, and they found an accelerated heart rate. I think this investigation was repeated by a Russian researcher just recently. This is simply fascinating stuff, because I think, the impact on physiology is actually the real impact on animals. Another way of looking at it is looking at blood hormone levels that indicate stress, for example, cortisol. And this has been done in fish, and to my knowledge, it could have been done also in marine mammals. But as I said, these studies there are not enough of these studies, and we certainly need more of that, because when it comes to the health of animals, we know that humans are affected by noise directly, and animals might be affected too. So there's an urgent need to increase this part of the research.
Was that also that study in the US where they measured stress hormone levels in feces of whales, of right whales, I think, and they were able to see that during the 9/11 terrorist attack, because there was a lowering of shipping in the area, that there was less stress.
Yes.
For whales.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, then another question from Patrick Lynn. He's very prolific. Thank you, Patrick, for making this interactive. He says, Boom has recommended 3 to 5 year baseline acoustic studies prior to offshore development or construction. What is the position on this time frame for best practice? I don't know if you covered that in the document.
We haven't been that specific, really. In the UK, it's standard practice to have 2-year baseline. I think the thing with marine mammals, or at least some of them, is that their distribution and abundance can vary quite a lot. So it's debatable whether 2, 3, or 4 even is sufficient. The best thing to have in the ideal world is long-term monitoring plan.
Isn't the question about, Patrick, is it about passive acoustic monitoring of marine life or baseline acoustics? If the question is baseline, if the question is passive acoustic monitoring of marine life, I'm with Sonia. It's the more you can do, the better. But we are constrained by cost effectiveness. So in Germany, for example, I can tell you that's 2 years. In Poland, is 1 year plus 1 month, and so on. When it comes to the acoustics, it's actually perhaps not needed to have these very long timeframes to actually get some kind of baseline impression. It's more important to reflect on the different environmental conditions, for example, sea states due to wind, that reflect actually an offshore wind farm in their level of action from low wind conditions to high wind conditions. So it depends on what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we have a question by Weneza asking, do you know of any opportunities for students to get involved in research or work connected to the topic of fighting underwater noise? I don't know if you guys have any answers to that.
Yes, I have an answer to that. I think that's a very good question. I'm very grateful for that. There is a conference happening next year called The Effects of Sound on Aquatic Life, that's organized by myself and other colleagues. And we actually promote students to come to this conference, and we pay actually through the donors we have for this conference. We pay their trip and also the admission, and in most cases also the hotel. So students that are really from a university can apply. They can give a presentation, or they just come to the meeting, and they are actually supported, because we want to promote that students actually meet with senior researchers to get more knowledge. So this is one way of getting into the program to participate in the Effects of Sound on Aquatic Life. That's happening in Berlin next year, so it's a very attractive venue as well in July. And then, of course, there are the university programs. When I was a student, I just did what I wanted to do, and I got a supervisor signing on to that. And then you have to network with colleagues, but again, from external institutions. But again, you will find these people through meetings, and they're very approachable. You can talk to them and, you know, ask them, can I do a thesis with you or can I work with you? And in most cases, you will have an open ear.
Yeah. And actually, Paula, who cannot put a question in the question and answer because we're hosting, she had a question for you. And it's about people working in the sector. Do you think that there's enough suitably trained young professionals coming through that can actually work on this, or is there actually a gap in the training for that? Do you think that we could train more people to work in this field?
That's a fantastic question. Maybe Sonia can answer to the regulatory side. From the research side, I think this field is growing. I mean, you have seen the United Nations decade is just starting. There's incredible amounts of work for researchers out there. So I don't see enough people coming through the ranks. So there's definitely room for more from all fields. For example, acoustic modelers are, you know, high profile acoustic modelers are really needed, but also biologists that are very experienced in assessing the sound impacts. It's the interesting part of this science is it's multidisciplinary. You can be a physicist, you can be a biologist, you can be a hardcore acoustician, or even a regulatory advisor. So there are a lot of opportunities to get into the field, I think. Sonia, correct?
Yeah, I would agree. We need more people with the skills to help protect marine species in general and to study the effects of noise and other marine pressures. So yeah, I think this year with COP26 and a lot of initiatives on oceans as well, the Ocean Decade will really put these issues at the forefront and raise awareness in the public, and hopefully we'll see a new generation of very keen marine or like Frank said, multidisciplinary skills coming along in the next decade or so.
Thanks. So, and Reneza has one last question about, you know, do you think, having gone through this process, do you think there's something else that she says she could do a scientific literature review for one of her studies? Is there something that you feel like, oh, if we had some more time, we could have also included that? Something new that maybe have come up? Frank, you were talking about the sort of Posidonia thing. Is there maybe something else?
You can do a lot of new things, but I think there are definitely things that are, in my view, more on the list than other things. I mean, it's actually a very good question, but you can go to the research questions because I hope we highlighted those. But I think I can tell you that, for example, personally in my field, the question on how animals move in response to underwater sound is a hot topic, I think. And you know, if you're interested in this kind of modeling, we definitely there's a need for review on this. We have written a paper on this that just came out, but there's room for more when it comes to that topic. From a biologist view, I think the issue of masking is potentially an extremely important issue. And it's a very interesting issue because it combines studies on communication, which is a fascinating topic in itself when it comes to marine life, more marine mammals than fish in this regard, I think. Sorry for the fish people. I have to say fish sounds are very interesting and fascinating, but marine mammals live in these very complex societies, so sound is really important for them. So how does human and man-made noise affect their communication system is also a fascinating and really interesting topic. So that's true of the two priorities I see, and two things where it would be worth to study a little bit deeper.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can add something to that. I think a lot of the research and like regulation is quite centered in US and European as well centric. And we touched this on our last recommendation, is how to ensure and reach out and help to other parts of the world that maybe have not got to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, for example, they don't have really good, like, solid directives or regulations, but a lot of the industries operating and the companies are the same because they're multinational companies going everywhere. And I think, indeed, there's been a lot of industry-led initiatives that are taking those best practices if they have if they employ best practice in a country, just because another country doesn't have such strict practice, they will employ the same practices. And I think this is encouraging, and would like to see more of that. But as kind of people working in this field, is that how can we best do that as well and reach out to other areas of the world. Another part of the report that I wish we could have spent a bit more time on, perhaps, is the emerging technologies. We need to find cheap, effective, easy to use technologies, and involve citizen science as well is a lot used these days. And I saw an article the other day about using GoPro cameras to record underwater sound. Apparently, they're quite good. And if you worked in this field, getting a hydrophone and all the systems attached to it, so you can listen and record sound in the right frequencies and so on, it's not cheap. So the cheaper tool, and also with all the aerial stuff and space, even from space, there's potential now with high definition, high resolution images you can get, because marine mammals live underwater mostly, but they do come to the surface as well. So there's a big potential there if we can zoom in those images. So it's just a fascinating field, really, technologies, and they could really help establish those long-term monitoring acoustic stations, we also visual just because we still lack, like we highlighted in the brief, we still lack from many populations of marine species good baseline data.
Yeah. And actually that goes to Bettina Taylor, who's from the Friends of the Earth in Germany. Her second question is, do you know of any long-term studies in Europe or long-term disturbance of marine mammals from noise? There's apparently been a study by Bader et al. In 2007 in Shark Bay.
Yes.
And so that's a good question. Do you guys know of any other long-term studies like that?
No, not so much. I mean, in Europe, it's difficult. I mean, Lars studied the bottlenose dolphin impacts in Shark Bay for a long time. But it was not only about noise, it was actually the presence of the vessels and the visual disturbance that actually disturbed the dolphins quite a bit. So that was a very nice long-term study. I think the problem is to monitor noise for long-term. This has not happened in Europe, and so far. So basically what happens now that there are long-term projects on the way, or long-term insofar as they provide some kind of baseline for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive in the first place to actually identify where, is there an increase in trend, or how is the baseline actually happening? And this is happening has happened in the Baltic through the BIAS project, in the North Atlantic and North Sea through Jungopans, which is a EU-funded project. Then there's Jonas, that's another project looking at underwater noise ranges or levels, and then Quiet Med in the Med. And once we have that data, then we can say something about the long-term impacts. So far these studies are pretty rare, actually. I know of a variety of studies that actually studied the populations of, or like lasted the populations of animals on the long term. For example, the bottlenose dolphins in the Murray Firth comes to mind by our friend Ben Wilson. I mean, he has been studying them for a long time. Mm-hmm. And what comes out of all these studies is actually one result, and we actually drum that beat also for the report. It's actually that it's not only one impact that affects populations, it's a whole cocktail of adverse impacts. And marine life has an enormous capacity to withstand these pressures, but it can be reaching a tipping point where just one, impact is too much. And this is a fascinating question. So I think long-term studies are done also in Europe, as I said, on the bottlenose dolphins, but also in other areas. but they are focusing on multi-factor and factor studies, and also on the long-term well-being of the individuals. So it's not only underwater noise; it's a variety of impacts likely acting on populations, and the key is to actually connect them and to make sense of all these impacts.
Yeah. Thank you. And then the first question that Bettina had, oopsie, my chat is now covering the question. That's very annoying. Hold on. How do I get away from that?
That was about the mitigation priorities, I think.
Yeah. She's basically saying that she agrees that we need lots of research, but we also already know that there's obviously some impact. So which measures do we think that we need to implement immediately in Europe to reduce noise? So maybe that's a question for Sonia. I don't know.
Yeah, I can try an answer. I mean, they're already being implemented, and there's a suite of measures. I gave a couple of examples here, and the thing is, some of the measures are still in development. Others are more well established. As I said, none is 100%, and so sometimes you do need that combination of measures. But most, I think, in European waters, by law, all of these noise sources, but seismic surveys, offshore construction involving hammering, pile driving, we advise the regulators on these activities, the use of they're called sub-bottom profiler surveys, high resolution surveys as well, and they undergo a EIA, and mitigation measures are always needed for the activity to take place. So
yeah, maybe one thing to point out is I agree with that sentiment, but we promote the risk-based framework. In the report, the risk-based framework specifies that actually there are situations where you don't have to take action. And that is when the impacts are not significant. And the question is, what is significant, of course? I mean, and you have to obey by the law, of course, that's very important. In some cases, it might be if you just hurt one animal, regardless of the densities, that's actually an effect that is not tolerable. In other areas, it might be in Denmark, for example, we have a system where we look at actually the densities and the proportion of the population that is affected. If we find that a certain proportion is affected, then the mitigation kicks in. So I guess in addition to what Sonia just said, I would like to mention that we have to act when the risk framework tells us to do so, but in some cases we don't really have to act.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is already established, though.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're not rethinking it every time. That's kind of what my point was. It's an established process in most countries in Europe. Member states should be.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's one last question. I see Patrick put in the chat some very specific things about GoPros, which I'm not going to repeat. You guys can have a look at it. But Paula still had a question again about the cooperation between the industry and with regulatory bodies. And do you think that's helped to guide the research on underwater noise, or was it more of a one-way process whereby the regulators say you can't do this, and then do you think there's been a good exchange of information and co-design of research by having this working together?
I'll just be brief and then pass on to Frank. Maybe if he can mention the GIP as a good example. But yeah, in the UK, we also had Cowrie a few years ago, and then ORGIP now. So there are consortiums of industry, usually it's led by industry, but also with in collaboration with government departments, advisors, and scientists. We also have in Scotland really good examples of working together between the offshore wind developers, the government, the scientists, the NGOs. So there's been quite a lot of industry-led or co-led initiatives that have definitely driven research and evidence gathering that have been very helpful. But yeah, the GIP is another example that is on our timeline in the brief, and it's very well established and goes back a long way. I can't remember. I can check now, but yeah, it was probably pre-2008 even.
Yeah, it's very important that I don't have much to add because you lined it out all perfectly. The only thing is that we have to emphasize that some of these funds actually require research to be peer-reviewed. And this is a really safety measure. JIP, for example, has a requirement that the results should undergo peer review. So that's a quality assurance for this. And many are. I mean, there are many papers have been coming out of these research programs, and they're all in highly scored, not all of them, but many of them are in highly scored scientific journals.
Yeah, I'll just say what JIP is, because we use this acronym and I don't think we say it. So it's Joint Industry Program, I think, and it's the oil and gas industry. I think that, and maybe the military as well, or at least, or maybe there's two. One, the oil and gas industry and the military also has a big program. The U.S. military, in particular, a huge program of research.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, and I think we're nearly at the end of our time. So thank you very much. I think I just want to thank you again to say, thank you very much for giving us a brief overview of what's in the document, and for giving the time and for actually taking the time to chair the working group, because indeed, chairing a working group like this is some amount of work. And I want to highlight that we have our next third Thursday science webinar happening on the 16th of December. And it will be by the working group chairs of the next new working group document that we have coming out on marine geohazard. So it's Heidrun Koop and Francesco Chiotti. And so you can sign in again in a month's time to see our new our next webinar, and we'll hear interesting things about geohazards. But in the meantime, I again want to thank Sonia and Frank for really your hard work on this, and for doing this under COVID situations where you couldn't get together with your working group to work through these things. It's much harder when you have to do it in between everything else, and you can't dedicate 2-3 days to sit down and discuss it. So thank you very much for your hard work on this and for presenting it here. And I look forward to getting feedback from people on the work on the document, which I think was